Hello, and welcome to the DevOps Best Practices. In this video, we are going to talk about some of the industry best practices, which companies that are trying to move to DevOps and people who have moved to DevOps already try to follow. Now, this is not a complete list, and this is not an industry standard list, which will be followed by all, since DevOps is a field which is constantly evolving. So every company or every organization have their own set of best practices, and they have a list of their own, which they try to adjust to their role. But yes, when we follow the companies who are pioneers in this field, companies like Amazon, Rackspace, Netflix, companies like this, what you will find is there is a common pattern among all these companies, and there are a couple of things which stand out apart from the others, and which will be or should be followed by most of the companies and the people who are trying to move to the DevOps field, or the DevOps framework or methodologies. Now, let's take a look at them one by one, and let's try to unpack what they really mean. So the most important thing which happens when you are trying to move to DevOps is the cultural change. Now, no matter what kind of tools you take, what kind of technologies you use, it is the cultural change which stands out. Let's say you have the best tools available, the best technologies available at your disposal. You have taken a license for some of the industry-leading tools for your company. Unless the people who are going to use those tools, your developers, your operations folks, your testers, unless they change their way of working, the way they think about software development and software delivery, you will not be able to achieve DevOps to the fullest extent. That's what we mean by the cultural change. And not only you as a developer, not only you as the operations professional has to adhere to these changes, but every single one in the organization has to embrace this cultural change. Now, when we talk about the cultural change, one very important aspect is to gain each other's trust. Now, let's say we hired a DevOps consultant for our company or our project, and the person comes and tells us that whatever we have been doing for the past 5 years, or 10 years, or 15 years is not the right way to do this. You have to change. Now, that is not something which will be welcomed by all. So how can an outsider come and tell us what we are doing for past 5 years, 10 years is wrong or it's not correct? So if you are the DevOps consultant or you are the DevOps engineer, you have to tell your developers and you have to tell your operations professionals that they have to make changes to the way they are working in order to get the best of results, in order to increase their productivity. Then you need to tell them in such a manner that you gain their trust. But how do you do that? In order to do that, you first have to target some of the things which can be immediately done, which can be implemented immediately. Now, that can be anything. You have to decide and think about what that is. Now, that can be a very small deployment automation task. It can be a very basic provisioning automation task, or it may be some automation of a unit test to make it from manual to automated manual testing. So it can be anything that completely depends on you and the project which you are working on. But the idea is to show some results to the stakeholders. That way, you gain their trust, and they are more receptive to your changes. They are more receptive to your suggestions, which you are going to make, and that is how you build the rapport. That is how you build the confidence within the team and within the project. There is something very important to understand. It's very crucial that you build the trust and that rapport with your stakeholders. Without it, you are not going to succeed in your DevOps transformation. Now, connected to the second point which we discussed, the third point is also equally important. You have to involve the stakeholders. DevOps is called an IT revolution. It's changing the fundamental way we have been delivering software for the past 15 to 20 years, or maybe more. So when we are talking about this fundamental change, we are talking from top to bottom. We are talking right from the CEO level to the level of the person who is an individual contributor. It can be a coder, it can be an operations guy, or it can be a tester. Everyone has to change their way of thinking. Everyone has to adopt and be adept at this change, which is going all the way across the organization. You cannot have DevOps properly implemented just with your developers, or just with your operations guys, or just with your testers, or just having a high-level meeting between project managers and the customers. You have to include each and every one of them, and you have to involve all the stakeholders in order to make a DevOps transformation in your company, project, or organization. That is very, very, very important at this time. This is perhaps one of the most important points to remember, which is a continuous learning approach. Now, when you start with your DevOps journey, it's like any other journey. You don't know the end result, and you don't know the outcome. At times, you don't even know what is going to be the next step. So you make some changes, you learn new things, and you build your bridge along the way. You try and understand your peer group. In most cases, you will find that in the DevOps journey, your customers are actually your peer groups, your colleagues. You have developers as your customers. You have your operations guys as your customers. You have your VMware admins, your load balancer guys, your networking professionals, your storage administrators. These are the people who you are trying to target. They are the end users for you. And they in turn are building things for the end users, which are the actual customers of your company. So it's very important to satisfy your customer's need. And in this case, your customers are your colleagues. You need to understand them. You should also be ready to make changes if needed. When you are learning new things, you might find that what you thought was correct 1 week ago or maybe 1 month ago is not correct anymore. That is not the right way you should have done this. So, you should be mature and accept the fact, and then make changes as soon as possible. This is something very crucial in DevOps transformation. More importantly, because DevOps is not something which has been around for years, rather it's a new field, every single company is trying to move to DevOps. If you leave aside a couple of the leaders, once again like Amazon, Google, Rackspace, or Netflix, who have been the early adopters and who have shown the benefits to the whole world that, yes, DevOps is revolutionary in increasing the productivity for the customers and for the company in general, and you can deliver products quickly with very minimal error if you follow this approach. Apart from those handful of companies, the rest of the companies, or the rest of the organizations and projects, they are trying to move to DevOps. When you try to move to something new, you have to be ready to take failure in stride. You need to understand that yes, there might be things which might go wrong. The approach might be incorrect, or at times there might be a better approach, a better paradigm to be given. That is something very important to meet at this time. And that is where your continuous learning approach comes into the picture. And yes, when you talk about continuous learning, we are talking about multiple failures. Since it's a new field, once again, there is no set standard. It is not a field we already have, a standard set of rules where you do XYZ things and not ABC things. There is no such list in DevOps, at least as of now. So you need to be very open to the failures, and you should be absolutely sure that there are going to be failures along the way. But don't think of that as a negative thing. Rather, take it as a positive and then learn from your mistakes. Next time, you'll know what not to do. DevOps is a field where people are trying to learn from each other. I am learning from your mistakes. You are learning from my mistakes. The idea is to collectively not make the same mistakes again and again. That should be the motto. Making a mistake once is absolutely fine. Twice, absolutely fine. But if you are doing the same mistake again and again without learning, that's not a good thing. That's not good at all. That means something's fundamentally wrong, which has to be changed. When we talk about failure, when you do some kind of automation, when you try to achieve DevOps step by step, then we talk about targeting the low-hanging fruits. We are talking essentially about some approach which might go right and some which might go wrong. So you have to take into consideration that yes, this is the approach which I should follow. This is the step which I can replicate in other projects, and this is the step which I should not be doing again in any other project. So collectively, we all are learning as IT professionals, as DevOps professionals. We are all learning from our mistakes. Now, this is perhaps one of the most important points, which tells you that you have to think backwards. If you have seen the Jeff Bezos statement, for the people who are not aware, Jeff Bezos is the CEO of the Amazon, and he is one of the pioneers. He is one of the visionary leaders today the whole world is looking up to. And he says, we innovate by starting with the customer and working backwards. That becomes the touchstone how we invent. What he means is that he first has the goal in front of him. The goal is to make the customers happy, to make the end user happy. And then he thinks backwards how he can do that, and then he translates that into the daily steps or daily tasks. If we do the same thing, we can determine individual steps which we do as a person, as an individual, as a coder, as an operational professional, as a tester. So you have to always think about your customers. In other words, whatever you are doing on a day-to-day basis, you should be in a position to relate your work to the end users. Think about how the task which you are doing today is going to be beneficial for the customer tomorrow or the day after. As a DevOps professional, our customers are the end users, who are our colleagues, the developers, the testers, and the likes. Because they are the ones who are targeting the end users. So if you make their life easier, they will be able to produce better results. They will be more productive for the company, and in general, you are contributing your job or your part to the company as a whole. Up until this point, we have been talking about the cultural aspects and the behavioral aspects of DevOps. This point talks about the technological aspect of DevOps. When we say technological, we mean that obviously DevOps culture is very important. When we talk about DevOps, the cultural part or the process integrity has a very crucial role. But everything will fall apart if you don't have the right set of tools and technologies to supplement what you have decided to do as a DevOps professional or as a project manager. So when we talk about selecting the tools, the most important part is to understand what is right for you. You should not be in a mindset that you must be using the industry standard tool. Think about what is good for your company. What is good for your project? What is good for others might not be good for you, so you need to be careful. You need to give it a proper thought, and even test multiple products if necessary. I will give one simple example when we talk about configuration management tools. It's very difficult choice between Chef and Puppet and some other industry standard tools. So, how do you choose one of them? The typical way people go about it is that they create a 2 to 3 parallel environment. They set up the lab with some of the live applications, then they set up a parallel lab, and they maintain those applications with the help of these tools for some time, probably 1 month, 2 weeks, 1 quarter, and then based on the feedback and based on the experience of the staff managing those applications, they come to a conclusion. They say, okay, Puppet is best, or Chef is best for me, or maybe Ansible is more appropriate for me. And then they decide on the tools and technologies. One more example can be, let's say you have been using TeamCity for your CI purpose, for your continuous integration purpose. Now, just because Jenkins is more popular than TeamCity, that does not mean you should move to Jenkins. Rather, you should see your benefits. TeamCity, if it works for you, and if you don't have any reason to change, if any other tool does not create or does not give you that additional value over your existing situation, then there is no point in moving to a different tool. So any tool or any technology, no matter how popular it is, might not suffice your needs. So be careful. Similarly, let's talk about cloud. Now today, everybody is trying to move partially or fully from the on-premise architecture to the cloud architecture. In cloud, when we talk about cloud implementation, we have multiple options. We have an option of public cloud, we have an option of hybrid cloud, and we have an option of private cloud. Now, which cloud you move to, or you want to move to, or how you decide is completely based on the type of application, your requirement, your security analysis, and what kind of user base you have. All these things play a major role. Which tool is more popular or which cloud is more popular does not make a difference. Just because AWS is very popular does not mean you should definitely move to AWS. If you move to AWS, is it adding any value to your existing project? If yes, please go ahead and make sure to move to it. If not, there's no reason you should move to it. You have multiple sets of tools in DevOps and in general in the software industry. You have source code management tools where you have multiple options. You have CI tools where you have multiple options. You have configuration management tool, which perhaps has the most competition. Then you have monitoring tools and log management tools. You always have multiple options. Which tool you are using is very important. One important thing is to understand how beneficial it is to your project. The second most important thing to understand is how good they are at integrating with each other. I'm just going to give you an arbitrary example. Let's say you have chosen Chef for your configuration management needs, and let's say for a second that Amazon does not have a great integration strategy, even though in reality it does. But let's say for the sake of example, it does not. Then it doesn't make sense for you to move to Amazon as a cloud provider. You need to think of all that. So these are just some of the examples which we need to think about. By the way, Amazon, as I said, I'm telling you once again, Amazon has a very good integration points with all of these tools, and some of the tools which you can see on the screen. All of these tools have really great ways of integrating with each other. Once again, you need to have a proper plan, and you need to do testing. You need to have a lot of testing before you can move and before you can decide on the actual course. That essentially completes the best practices based on what we have seen in observation and what we have seen after checking various companies. If I could summarize all of this in one slide, it would be that the cultural changes we talked about are most important over technology. If your staff does not have a mindset to change, you cannot do anything. You cannot achieve full DevOps or DevOps to a full extent unless the people who are working on it are the people who are responsible for the change. Try to achieve some tasks initially, which will give you the confidence and trust factor as a customer for the DevOps people, so it works for everyone. And yes, all the stakeholders, as we discussed, everyone is involved in DevOps from top to bottom. You should be ready to learn new things, and you should be ready to unlearn all of the things you have learned already which don't fit with DevOps. Yes, you learn from your failures. Customer first always, as Jeff Bezos says, one of the visionary leaders of today's IT industry. And yes, the tools and technology, they play very important roles in having a proper DevOps transformation for your company. If you falter in any of these steps, you are bound to fail overall in your DevOps transformation. All of them are equally important, and all of them have to be paid equal attention when you are planning your strategy for the DevOps transformation of your company or your project. So, that's it for now. I hope you have found this video informative, and thank you for watching.
Hey, want to become an expert in cloud computing? Then subscribe to Simplilearn's channel and click here to watch more such videos. To nerd up and get certified in cloud computing, click here.